What if Sasuke Uchiha fought against Kisame Hoshigaki? We're going to talk about that today and more. What's going on, guys? TG or ThunderGod here. Pretty interesting matchup. These are two characters I haven't gotten the opportunity to talk about in depth, and I figured this would be an opportunity. And if my poll told me anything, it's that this video is actually somewhat necessary, at least in my opinion. Let's not waste any more time. Crack open a cola can, bust out the popcorn, briefcase open, video inside. Let's get straight to it. Now, the first order of business is examining Sasuke versus Kisame's performance against B. It's not really a hot take to say Kisame performed far better than Sasuke and Taka as a whole, but, and this is a big thing I saw in the poll, this doesn't really answer the question presented today. Saying Kisame washes Hebi Sasuke because he had a better B fight is a pretty gross simplification on both fights. Let's start with Sasuke versus B. The version of Sasuke that fought B was noted to be quite affected physically, not having quite healed from his battle against Itachi, meaning his physicals aren't up to his Hebi counterpart. This will become relevant in a moment. Stay with me. This, coupled with losing Orochimaru's curse mark, are a huge nerf to Sasuke as a whole, as he's physically weaker than his Itachi self counterpart, doesn't have a chakra multiplier in the form of a curse mark that increases his stats, offers him higher jutsu hacks and abilities, and other minor abilities. I know some people may say, well, Sasuke got the Mangekyo Sharingan, so he should be stronger. This isn't outright the case. You could be considered stronger holistically, but it's not like you gain your Mangekyo Sharingan and your base stats shoot up a ridiculous amount. At its core, it offers higher perception with stronger / faster techniques at a higher chakra cost. The main thing that amps your body when you're an Uchiha are strong emotions like hatred, which is something that Sasuke has in the 5 Kage Summit. Him gaining more hatred throughout the summit is synonymous with him getting stronger, as every time his hatred is noted or his chakra is noted to get colder, he's noted to have gotten stronger or his Susanoo evolves. I'm not saying he can't be considered stronger holistically via his hacks and abilities, but I'm saying in terms of physicals, and Uchiha doesn't flick on their Mangekyo Sharingan and get 3 times stronger. That's not really how it works. Yeah, the perception increases and they gain access to faster, harder hitting abilities via higher chakra cost, but they don't just shoot up. Like, it's not the Kaioken. It's not like a Sage Mode amp. It's not like the Curse Mark. It's very different in those aspects. The main way Sasuke increases his strength in the Kage Summit was via his hatred and how it was powering up his body. There are statements like the Data Book 3 statement when Sasuke awakens his Mangekyo that note his stats are bound to grow even more, but I think this is further in line with Sasuke's performance in the Kage Summit when he's fully recovered. Here, on top of not having those continuous emotional amps to push his physicality to higher levels, Sasuke isn't recovered, nor is he well versed with his Mangekyo, so he doesn't really get to reap the rewards, nor does it really offer him such an insane increase that it's counteracted by the shit physicals, along with losing his curse mark and other abilities. This also isn't crazy relevant since Sasuke only uses his Mangekyo twice against B, once for Genjutsu and once for Amaterasu. He actually doesn't use his base Mangekyo to even amp his perception. None of it really changes anything pertaining to this discussion. So Taka Sasuke, aside from having far better Genjutsu and Amaterasu, isn't really stacking up to his heavy counterpart. So the idea that B beat Taka and Kisame pressed him harder ignores a lot of context surrounding Sasuke, especially when you consider how Taka Sasuke's feats aren't that far off actually from what Kisame performs in base. We'll touch on that in a second. So the whole idea of A greater than B greater than C means A is greater than C doesn't really work in this specific situation. Now I want to start with close quarters combat and work our way out, because this is probably the biggest point that I have to cover for the rest of this discussion to make sense. Now, I actually think this is somewhat of a relatively even fight. Let me explain. We see in Sasuke's fight with B, Sasuke is actually able to contend with B in close quarters combat, reacting to his continuous combos for a short time. Not losing to B in stats in this scenario, but his superior swordplay being extremely unorthodox and hard to read. If you actually check the parry indicators that Kishimoto puts in when characters are throwing hands in hand-to-hand combat, or they're clashing swords or, clashing fists or something to that extent, Sasuke actually parries B's strikes 18 times before he gets tagged. Again, due to B's unorthodox swordplay. Then you couple this with the fact that Sasuke can react to version 1B. Now, I do want to clarify, this is version 1B with 3 tails, in which Sasuke reacts at the last minute with his Sharingan, tapping off B's forehead to dodge him, which is still a good feat, again, considering this is a nerfed version of Sasuke, and I do think this is a good feat. It's not the best feat, but it is a good feat since Sasuke only activates his Sharingan after B launches off the rock. Although this being a linearly moving attack does make it easier to dodge, it is still a general good feat, as Sasuke's physicals do have to be close enough to where he can actually just tap off B's forehead to actually get out the way. But still worse than what Kisame performs in his fight, where he's able to swing Samehada down in response to version 1B with 7 tails compared to the 3 that Sasuke dodged. I understand Samehada did absorb B's version 1 cloak previously, the one with 4 tails, along with the fact that Samehada is the one that absorbs it this time, but Kisame is able to still swing the sword down before B actually intercepts him or like throw it below him. So he does have a better showing in this instance, but I also do want to note Kisame was able to get tagged by base B when he was being pincered in by B utilizing ninja tools coded in Raiton. The point I am making here is that there is not really a significant speed gap or such a blatant speed disparity between both these characters to the point where base B isn't a threat to them or they aren't able to combat version 1B at a higher stage. And again, I have to stress this, even if you argue Kisame's performance is slightly better in the sense that he's able to combat this version 1B or react to it along with base B, when you include the context that Sasuke was physically affected to the point that Jugo was able to point it out off an observation, along with that Sasuke having ways to amp himself and increase his stats and jutsu potency further, it creates much more of a, I don't want to say stylistic matchup, but neither character can really be argued to be blitzing the other. Both of these characters in terms of their physicals would just exist in that base B to version 1B range, which even looking off B's own performance in his fight isn't really a speed tier in terms of difference. So there's no real way to argue that Kisame or Sasuke would just be outright, you know, decapitating the other before the other could move or react. And if everybody's going to argue that Kisame could react to version 2B, he doesn't really. That's Samehada that just absorbs the chakra from B after the impact. Like, it doesn't even absorb it fast enough to not take damage. So this would be the consistent range for Kisame and Hebi Sasuke's physicals. The idea that base Kisame and Hebi Sasuke are in a comparable speed range is tightened a bit further off the idea Kisame thought Deidara was one of the stronger Akatsuki members, which only really works as stronger would have to be in relation to Kisame himself, or Kisame would have to think Deidara is strong in relation to his own abilities. I know a lot of people are also going to bring up Kisame being 7th gate guy level or being able to press guy into the 6th gate. I'm going to talk about that. Don't think I'm glossing over that. That will come up and that is relevant to the discussion. In terms of durability, it's actually pretty easy to argue Sasuke would be able to damage Kisame. I mean, base B swords were capable of doing so. Coupled with Kisame conceding a lightning enhanced pencil would have bored a hole right through him. This is relevant due to Sasuke running Chidori through the Kusanagi blade was able to cancel out with B running Raiton through his blade, and neither blade really snaps, so they are evenly matched. Asuma makes a note to Naruto too that when two shinobi of equal abilities face off each other with blades, the sharper blade will decide the outcome. The final nail in the coffin is Sasuke being able to stop B's blade from cutting down the Executioner's blade with his own Chidori, canceling out B's lightning release with his own. So Sasuke does essentially have the same AP or same capacity to actually put down Kisame given the right circumstances. Kisame's not as relevant for AP. I know that sounds weird, but his win cons don't really come from that. The best argument is that Samehada is on the same level as the Executioner's blade, which could snap base B swords, meaning he'd be able to damage Sasuke if Kisame just swung it at him. However, it isn't quite as relevant since Kisame kind of makes note of this in part 1 that the Executioner's blade isn't even really for making clean cuts, it's for shredding your opponent down. This section is more to say, okay, if these guys swung their swords at each other, yeah, they could damage each other. So we don't have to run into any walls of A character is just too durable for B character to damage, you know? There's no need for anything like that. Now, getting into stamina or chakra reserves, I think it's pretty clear that Kisame is coming out the greater here. I mean, just having the most chakra in the Akatsuki is kind of ridiculous, and no amount of beats from Sasuke would really be able to just give him the win in terms of a battle of attrition. But I also think Sasuke's reserves are too impressive to not also discuss. So when you're talking about Hebi Sasuke, a lot of people don't point to the mass number of jutsu he uses pre and during the Itachi fight. Before/during the Itachi fight, Sasuke ends up using 9 Chidori total, which is just a pretty ridiculous number, honestly speaking. He uses 2 before the fight with Itachi, and the rest are used during the fight, which if you actually go back and look, I have it on screen, you'll be able to see every example, but he's using it for everything. He's using it to break the ceiling of the hideout. He's using it to code his weapons in Chidori. It's just pretty ridiculous. He also uses 1 snake clone, 2 fireball in the fight, the Orochimaru style substitution, the fire style Art of the Dragon Flame 2 to 3 times in the fight, along with an unquantifiable amount of chakra he used to break through Itachi's Tsukuyomi or their Genjutsu bout earlier in the fight. So even though Kisame takes this category pretty blatantly, I just did want to note Sasuke is absolutely no slouch in this department and has ninjutsu to throw. The next thing I want to touch on is Kisame's chakra absorption. Now, The issue with Kisame's chakra absorption via Samehada is that it's only really shown to be able to absorb objects or individuals coated in chakra. Examples of this are B's Raitone stacked blade or his Bijou cloak that is literally just chakra coating his body. It's most consistent that Samehada has to kind of be biting down on somebody and Kisame has to use the sword as a medium for him to actually absorb chakra directly from the person. We see against characters like Guy or Asuma, both of which who make physical contact with the blade and take damage, there is no chakra absorption taking place. It creates a weird situation with Samehada as a whole and as to what it can absorb and what it can't. Boruto actually offers far more clarification on Samehada and its upper limits. We have showings like Samehada actually absorbing the chakra out of shadow clones, causing them to be destroyed, and it's explicitly shown that the chakra gets absorbed first before the clones actually pop for clarification, which is important detail, especially when coupled with the next example. More impressively, we see that Samehada is blatantly able to absorb ninjutsu, such as wind style, which just almost gets vacuumed into the blade. It seems like there's somewhat of a radius for what can be absorbed with Samehada, but it does show that ninjutsu itself can be absorbed, which also puts into perspective Samehada not liking fire style, like when it cuts through Itachi's fireball, being more so a characteristic of the blade itself and its personality not liking fire, as opposed to some upper limit or finite limitation for what Kisame can or can't absorb. It is also further confirmed that Samehada doesn't absorb chakra through physical contact, as Shizuma, the user of Samehada, had to create a pseudo blood mist, like it's almost like a summoning technique that he uses his blood on the sword, which directly eats chakra from the opponent's wounds that goes into Samehada. So it kind of cements the idea that Samehada can't really just damage you and siphon your chakra off at the same time. It seems that the chakra siphoning through direct contact has to be something when Samehada is just biting down on you, or is just a process that Kisame kind of has to commit to that more likely than not wouldn't happen in most battles. Now, relating this to Sasuke, I want to reverse engineer this for a sec. I partially thought when scripting this video, you could make a potential case for Kisame actually being able to absorb the curse mark or extensions of the curse mark body, such as the wings, as we see based on the B fight that Kisame can actually absorb the 8 tails tentacle itself, with it reforming to chakra during the absorption. This also being shown with B's bones in the version 2 lariat. This is relevant due to how the curse mark and the 8 tails body parts, like the tentacles, are born out of chakra and return to the user in the same manner. The 8 tails tail returning to B and the curse mark extensions returning to the mark. Hence, you could see why I thought this could be a case. The problem is that Senjutsu and the curse mark in general are more so impacting the user on a biological level, evidenced by people turning into literal toads or toad statues when absorbing too much senjutsu or having their physical features altered. In the case of the curse mark, it's similar as to when Sasuke's wing gets blown up by Deidara in the fight. It actually seems likely that during that time frame in Shippuden, Sasuke's curse mark wing was permanently gone. The reason I say this is that the left wing is gone even in the air when Sasuke could have used it to reach Deidara faster, and you might say, well, maybe he needed to regen it or it took a little bit of time for it to come back, but this actually persists in the Itachi fight where Sasuke is only shown using the right wing to block against Itachi's fireball. And you could say, well, maybe he just happened to use the right wing. But if you actually look at the Genjutsu battle where Sasuke and Itachi are like fighting with their Genjutsu prowess and Sasuke breaks through Tsukiyomi, Sasuke actually uses the snakes on his left side despite the fact that a wing would have worked far better against the Itachi clone as previously shown. So it actually, like, even in the Genjutsu where nothing's real, his wing isn't back still. So it seems logical that the wing was permanently gone, at least from the Deidara to the Itachi fight, meaning that the curse mark and its variations or like its extensions of the body aren't really up for grabs for Samehada's chakra absorption. As like other variants with Senjutsu and how it transforms your body, it's much more linked biologically than B's chakra tentacles, which Kisame can absorb. Techniques like Sasuke coating his Kusanagi blade in Chidori or coating his arm in Chidori are up for grabs, and Samehada should be able to absorb them from a radius. And if you factor in the Boruto anime and the fact that Samehada can absorb ninjutsu itself, it also may put into question all of Sasuke's Chidori variants like Chidori Senbon, Chidori Spear, and how these might just become food for Samehada, which creates a really bad matchup for Sasuke stylistically speaking, as a part of his arsenal is already cut away, and a more effective part against the weapon would be fire style, but then you're also fighting a water style user with fire styles, which you could see why that wouldn't turn out too hot. Saw what I did there. Alright, my bad. Now, I just touched on the chakra absorption point, but getting into the actual matchup, I think this matchup does favor Sasuke in terms of close quarters. I already talked about how their stats aren't that different, and Kisame in character does lead close quarters in a lot of these fights. This version of Sasuke actually has access to some abilities that later versions really don't. One of these abilities is poison. He has poison in his arsenal, which most people don't seem to bring up. He has this via his twin snake curse that him and Orochimaru utilize, where two long snakes slither out of the caster's sleeves, the snakes in question being noted to have poisonous fangs. These specific snakes that are summoned are noted to be Sasuke and Orochimaru's, as in Orochimaru uses them in battle the same way Sasuke does, and it directly references Orochimaru using them on Tenchi Bridge. I'm going to elaborate more on that in a second on why these are Orochimaru snakes, but these snakes are actually pretty strong. They're noted to be magnitude stronger than regular snakes, and it's not just for show. These snakes actually do have pretty ridiculous binding strength based on the feats they portray. Let's look at them. We actually see Orochimaru use them to restrain Four Tails Naruto's arm. Four Tails Naruto is shown shooting his arm out, and Orochimaru uses this snake to actually restrain the arm, as you see like the shaking lines, noting that there is a bit of a strength struggle, with the snakes only dissolving due to the corrosive chakra coating Naruto. So these snakes are capable of stopping Four Tails Naruto's physicals, which adds a lot of consistency to them, as Sasuke could stop Suigetsu and Jugo mid-strike, the duo being fighters who are capable of tangling with the Raikage and a lower version of his lightning cloak in terms of physicals. Four Tails Naruto, for perspective, could also just go blow for blow with a Sannin in terms of physicals. So this is very impressive. Now, if you're wondering why I think these are able to be translated over, and I think these are the same snakes that Orochimaru uses, the data book references both of these variations without differentiation, with the snakes being described like the arrows are pointing to both of them. But more importantly, I actually believe that Sasuke just gained Orochimaru's summoning contracts when he absorbed him, or these are just the direct result of the curse mark. I lean towards the former interpretation, because we see in the Itachi fight that these snakes actually protrude out of Sasuke's curse mark when he's being cornered by Itachi and his shadow clone. And this is important because it also helps explain why Sasuke has access to larger variations of these snakes, or can just summon Manda despite Manda not being cool with him and Sasuke having to control him. The fact that none of these snakes are ever used again after Sasuke loses the curse mark and Orochimaru kind of puts the nail in the coffin, to where I think you can say, okay, these are all just the same snakes. Sasuke gained access to Orochimaru's summoning contracts and can just use these snakes at will. So look at it like this. Sasuke has access to Sannin level snakes that can fight somebody with Sannin physical. And if that bothers you, I mean, a nameless toad blocked this swing from Samehada in part 1. You know, I don't know what else to tell you aside from that. It's just how it is. These snakes, on top of having relevant physicality, the fact that they can just inject poison via their bites is also really detrimental, as Kisame as a fighter has no known poison resistances. Not saying they don't exist, I'm saying we haven't seen it, so you can't really claim he has them in the first place. So I do think that is something worth noting, and that does lead to a potential win con for Sasuke. With all this being said though, I do think Kisame actually can combat these snakes and wouldn't just be overwhelmed by them, at least in terms of physicals. A good 1-to-1 is that Yamato is able to suppress Four Tails Naruto for a prolonged period of time with his wood style, to the point that it was an ongoing struggle for Four Tails Naruto to eventually break the wood. So we know that Yamato's wood style actively restraining somebody does also scale to these Four Tails levels of physicality or strength. Why is this relevant to Kisame? Well, if you fast forward to the Waterfall of Truth, we actually see that Kisame, after being blasted by Hirodora and having his body physically mangled, is also able to break out of Yamato's wood style while Yamato was suppressing his own chakra. Meaning Kisame should also be able to physically break free from these snakes, even if they temporarily hinder his movement. But that's all it really takes in these types of scenarios. So I don't think they're above Kisame in strength, but I think they're right around the same threshold to where they're threatening, and they would be something that Kisame himself has to look out for. Exemplified to the point that Itachi and his shadow clone actually had to back off from Sasuke when utilizing this snake. You can't argue this portion of the fight is in Genjutsu. I don't think it is, nor do I think this feat is something Sasuke can't perform normally, or any of his feats during the Genjutsu that he performs. So I've been darting around in this matchup a lot, and there's been a couple reasons from this. I think the base Kisame points are very relevant, because Kisame in pretty much every fight leads in with his base physicals before he does any of his crazier stuff. And there's also a reason for this. I want to switch gears and talk about Kisame strength-wise and a lot of his higher-end feats and a lot of his arsenal now, because honestly, I just want to bring up some arguments I hadn't heard for Hebi Sasuke, and I did think it was relevant to the discussion, as, you know, these are things Hebi Sasuke uses in character and doesn't use after that point due to losing them. But let's switch gears. Now, getting into Kisame's strength, right? I have a big problem with how people interpret Kisame strength-wise, because I think there's 3 distinct levels to Kisame. There's Kisame in base, which is what we have been discussing thus far. There's Kisame when he's amped by topography, or a body of water, or the environment as a water-style user. The last is Kisame fused with Samehada. Everything being discussed up to this point is Kisame just using Samehada and focusing on Chakra Absorption. If Kisame actually does decide to use the water-style exploding water shockwave, this turns into a much different fight. A lot of Kisame's feats are kind of amplified when he's amped by topography, or water style users in general just show far better feats when they have access to large bodies of water. Kisame is no different in this regard. We see this in his fight with Guy, specifically with the 30% of Kisame's chakra that fights Guy. You'll often hear 30% Kisame press Guy into the 6th gate. While this is true, it leaves out a lot of context. In close quarters combat and physical stats, Guy was actually competing with Kisame. He was able to disarm Samehada from Kisame's hand and actually block his strike that led Guy to getting pushed into the water. Getting submerged by Kisame using his other arm to slam down on Samehada, but Guy ultimately losing to Kisame's raw strength, getting pushed into the water, in which Kisame responds when Guy's underwater, the water style 5 Hungry Shark, a jutsu that Kisame used to essentially stun lock Guy, creating a wicked current that takes away their prey's freedom of movement before tearing apart the defensive prey with their sharp teeth. Only then did Guy know, I have no choice, and resort to the 6th gate, right? So that's Exhibit A. Keep that in mind in just a second. Going on, we have Exhibit B, this being Kisame versus 7th gate Guy. We see Kisame explicitly note that he has the environmental advantage via the topography, that being the large amounts of water, which aided Kisame in using jutsu like the water release 1000 feeding shark, which forced Guy to use the 6th gate to counteract the sheer scale of the attack, with Guy needing a larger blast radius, that being the 7th gate, in which Kisame responds with the water shark bomb that is able to match the Hirodora in terms of speed. Keep in mind, just before this, base Guy was able to step on and react to Kisame using a much smaller variation of the water shark bomb. What do these two examples or Kisame's main fights against Guy have in common? When Kisame has access to large amounts of water, he's able to press Guy into these higher levels or higher stages of the gates, but in terms of his pure physicals, he's not really outclassing Guy or just slamming him around. When Kisame actually does have a topography advantage, he's able to just use techniques that force Guy to combat them via entering the 8th gate, specifically the 6th and 7th gate, which is kind of a ridiculous strength difference, but very consistent. An example I will use to outline this is Suigetsu. In the B fight, Suigetsu regularly is getting clowned on by base B, right? He's just not able to do anything. B can disarm his blade, but when he has access to large water and can evoke the Tate Eboshi, like the giant jellyfish that he uses in the fight, he's able to intercept full 8 Tails Killer B's charge, which is kind of ridiculous because B gets far faster with each increment of 8 Tails chakra, as the Kisame fight outlined pretty extensively, but he's also able to wrestle with this full 8 Tails and survive a tail beast bomb. So if water can amp Suigetsu to that degree, it's no wonder why Kisame is doing so well, especially for someone of his caliber who's stronger than Suigetsu. Why is any of this relevant? The reason this is relevant in this specific discussion is that even though base Kisame can't really perform these feats or isn't quite as crazy, he essentially can create his own topography boost via the water style exploding water shockwave, which is demonstrated in the fight with Team Guy, where Kisame can just turn a desert into an ocean or a large body of water, noting that even a barren plain turns into a raging sea, with the data book also supplementing this by saying it changes the battlefield the moment the jutsu is invoked, allowing him to fight in the most comfortable area. So even though Kisame kind of needs a large body of water to invoke these higher end feats, it's not a problem because he can just make it, right? So you kind of have a situation, and this is where it goes back to the beginning of the video. If you're not really that much faster than Kisame and you can't really stop him from making this large body of water, you're not really going to be able to do anything about his more extreme variations of his jutsu that allow him to hit these much higher thresholds in terms of strength. So I do think Kisame is kind of a different strength level when he has access to all this water, but it's not really an issue because he can just make it. So he can self-amp himself with topography. But the important thing to note is that there is a distinct strength difference between him with the large body of water and when he's just flying solo with Samehada. All of this is to say that if Sasuke can't prevent the water style exploding shockwave, he's going to be in a horrible position, though it's not unwinnable. Via the curse mark, Sasuke can fly and kind of play around Kisame's large body of water. Sasuke being able to fly is such an underrated ability we don't get to see because we only really have 2 fights where he's able to use both wings with the curse mark. In the second one, it gets blown off and he can only partially fly. He has to kind of maneuver around with one wing. Flight itself is only an ability used by the Tsuchikage or Six Paths characters, so Sasuke actually having this ability is pretty impressive and actually does help him a lot in this matchup. In character, if Kisame does create this water, which he does in the B and Guy fight, so I do think it is probable that he would make it here, Sasuke would more than likely respond with Curse Mark Flight, in which case most people are probably going to point to the fact that, well, he's up in the air, there's a large body of water, that would just be amazing at conducting electricity. This is perfect Kirin potential. I want to just talk about Kirin for a second. I think Kirin, in terms of strength, is actually extremely variable. It's very variable in terms of how strong it can be. The variation used against Itachi was made with Sasuke using 2 to 3 Art of the Dragon Flame, shooting them up into the air or atmosphere, however you want to put it, along with the Amaterasu aiding in adding heat to the atmosphere, creating a large-ass thunderhead. The databook notes that each fire dragon head, or each like singular Art of the Dragon Flame, creates thunderheads, as in plural. Thunderhead being a rounded mass of cumulus or cumulonimbus cloud often appearing before a thunderstorm, pretty much means that Sasuke should be able to create one with a single Art of the Dragon Flame. There's no need for speculation in this matter, however. In Sasuke Jin Raiden, we actually see Sasuke create Kirin with a single Great Fire Dragon technique, which is consistent with the databook just previously noted, which means Sasuke can vary the size of the Kirin with how much fire he outputs into the atmosphere. Which puts into perspective, the variation used against Itachi is just some crazy version where he shot multiple of these fire dragons, with the Amaterasu adding more heat to the atmosphere. This basically means that if Sasuke's in the air, Kirin is a real possibility. It doesn't actually require an insane amount of prep, especially if Sasuke's already flying up. He should just be able to shoot 3 or 4 of those. And if Kisame's playing closer to the water or isn't jumping around, which I imagine he wouldn't be, this would be a big problem. The only issue in using this line of reasoning is that there's no direct quantification or feats to say for these different variations of Kirin, so it's kind of a bit more variable. But if you believe that Sasuke could just electrocute Kisame via the water using a smaller Kirin, I just do want to note it may not equal an auto win, since Sasuke performs a similar strategy to base via using the liquidation from Suigetsu's body. So yeah, it's kind of tough to say. I think this is a real strategy, and I do think this is a legitimate win con, especially if you think the Kirin Sasuke can create is comparable to the variation that he used against Itachi, which was able to destroy a variation of the Susanoo that wasn't using the Yadomir. In which case, if you think Sasuke can get close to that, yeah, Kisame's just dead. I'm sorry to tell you, there's no real way to argue it around. I also won't sit here and pretend like Sasuke doesn't have options if Kisame goes in the water. He can summon larger variations of the snakes I mentioned earlier, one of which is capable of tanking 2 C1 explosives from Deidara, or Manda himself, which Sasuke has to use Genjutsu to control. But Kisame's never really pressed. Like, Manda would make a difference in this fight, but it's hard to gauge how much, and I don't see a situation where Kisame can't simply stall out the summon timer. Like, the best situation would be Sasuke tries to set up Kirin while he summons Manda to stall Kisame in the water and just nukes both of them with it. You know what I mean? Something to that extent is probably the best way I could see him being utilized. And even smaller snake variations, Kisame could just respond with his own shark summons. Even if they're inferior, these summons were also capable of killing Kisame himself. So at the very least, they're threatening enough, in my opinion, to where they could go band for band. I would probably say the snakes are a little stronger, but Kisame kind of operates with the sharks in a quantity versus quality type manner. Kisame's bag just gets way deeper when he has access to these large amounts of water. He gains access to water clones, which are on the same level as shadow clones. A battle of attrition also heavily favors Kisame in this aspect, as even though Curse Mark Stage 2 is a very powerful and potent power-up, Sasuke can't use it forever. It's only really usable in short bursts, or he's been shown to use it in short bursts, which means when he comes down, he's going to get hit with something like the 1,000 Shark Wave that he used against Six Gate Guy outside of Turtle Island, which, you know, obviously isn't too great for Sasuke. I know some people also may bring up the Genjutsu point for Sasuke. I think it's possible, and I think he could implement it in his fighting style, as a lot of people he fights, he is able to put under Genjutsu who are pretty acutely aware of the Sharingan's capabilities, like Deidara or Danzo, although both those people had countermeasures or were able to break out of it. I think in Kisame's case, it's kind of weird since he literally travels with Itachi and he explains to Deidara verbatim when and how he lost to the Sharingan. So to say he probably wouldn't have some answer for it or know how to counter it, you know what I mean? It'd be kind of weird. I won't dismiss it entirely, but I also wouldn't use this as like the crutch of an argument, if that makes sense. Like, I think it can be used in tandem with a strategy that Sasuke could employ, but on its own, I don't really see it working against Kisame. This really comes down to if Sasuke has a really good start of the fight. If you think Samehada can just rip out a Chidori Spear or absorb it entirely, Sasuke's best attributes come at the beginning of the fight, where he could just employ these tactics that are super effective against Kisame. And I know people kind of may get hung up on the like, oh, why is it even worth talking about base Kisame? But in character, Kisame does prefer to fight in base before he performs the tactics I pointed out later in the video, and Sasuke is a close-range fighter. It's actually his go-to. The minute he sees Deidara, he tries to use Body Flicker and gets close to him. If I was going to rank it out of 10, I think 7 out of 10 times Kisame just sweeps, and those 3 out of 10 times are where Sasuke can just get the leverage or perform some sort of strategy that Kisame wouldn't be prepared for, like a snake summons, use Curse Mark or partial Curse Mark transformation in close quarters combat to restrain Kisame, possibly disarm him of Samehada. There's really a lot of different different ways this fight can go, but Sasuke's bag is at its deepest when his opponent is in close to mid-range, which is ironically where Kisame's bag is at its weakest in some aspects of his arsenal. Not saying he's just weak in close quarters, but I'm saying Sasuke's bag is so much more deeper. Bro, you could hop in there, man. You could literally live in there. You could open property in there. It's pretty deep. Possible shuriken jutsu laced with wires that Kisame may not be able to perceive. There's really a lot of different ways, and the Sasuke does have a lot of options against this base Kisame type fighter. But I think the overarching idea is that Kisame would just out-stamina Sasuke, would shred down his Chakra Reserves with higher implications for the ninjutsu he can absorb. You kind of have to give Sasuke a perfect fight, which is why I leaned into that 3 out of 10. There's honestly a lot more I could talk about, but this video is absurdly long. I didn't even mean for it to be this long, but I just found myself going on some tangents that I felt were necessary for these 2 characters. But let me know what you guys think down below. I'm sure there's another point I could have mentioned or another avenue of victory for these characters, but let me know what you guys thought down below. If you guys have been enjoying these like solo matchups where I kind of take a bit of time to go really in depth, let me know, because you know, I think they were really oversaturated for a while, but I just feel like in a lot of these bigger videos I don't quite have as much time to really get into the nitty gritty. So, you know, let me know if you guys have any other matchups down below, and I'll see if maybe I think they're close. But yeah, let me know what you guys think down below. Also, Oro coming out is not a win condition for Sasuke, in my opinion, since that's kind of like that's like a third party kind of interjecting. You know, it doesn't really work, because then he's gonna lose his body. You know what I mean? So I don't really see that as a W. In case somebody brings that up. Bye bye.